Before a drenched bride passed out on his porch, a rancher had been living alone for 10 years. Malachi Thorne had vowed to abstain from love, women, and all the foolish things that come with letting someone into your heart. Individual. However, all he had constructed to defend himself was about to collapse when he opened his door that storm-torn evening. Disintegrate in an instant. As Malachi stepped onto his porch, the valley was filled with the sound of thunder crackling like gunfire, by the screaming wind and what sounded like sobbing. There, sprawled like a broken object against his wooden steps doll, was a woman wearing a bridal gown that was so drenched that it stuck to her like a thick layer. Mud turned white silk gray, and rain ripped lace following her like the remains of broken hopes. His coffee mug was still warm as he remained motionless, his grizzled hands observing the stranger who had suddenly materialized on the most terrible night in weeks. She wasn't shifting. He believed she could be dead for a moment. The world had dropped another casualty on his doorstep for testing what remained of his humanity. 10 years. He had gone 10 years without anyone ever stepping foot on his property. And now this, of all things, a bride. The humor in the universe was perverted. Malachi knelt and put down his drink. Next to her, his old clothes were instantly soaked with rainwater. He could tell she was breathing up close. Breaths were shallow and laborious, and they froze in the frigid air. Despite her dark hair being glued to her face, he could make their fragile faces were tainted by fatigue and a look of worry. Even when he was unconscious, he would seen that expression on his face in the mirror before. He had discovered his wife in the arms of another man that morning. "Ma'am," the voice was rusty from lack of use and sounded rougher than planned. No answer. The storm was becoming harder, and they were out cold. In the distance, the mountains were lighted by lightning revealing walls of rain coming at them like an army on the march. Malachi looked back at his snug, dry, and warm hut, all he had constructed to keep the outside world out. Then he glanced down at this enigmatic woman who had managed to locate her. Route to the one location that was meant to be shielded from heartache and difficulties. He could drop her off there, return inside, sip his coffee, and act as though he hadn't seen her. She would either be dead or gone by daybreak. Additionally, either way, his part would stay in place. However, as the sky was split by another lightning strike, he noticed something that made his stomach knot. Beneath the muck and ripped lace, she could just make out the marks on her left wrist. Dark finger-shaped signs that revealed a tale he was all too familiar with from his days as sheriff. When he still thought that humans should be protected after being harmed, she fled so far, and with such desperation that she ended up here, on the outskirts, wearing a wedding gown that now resembled a shroud for a grave. Malachi muttered a curse and lifted her up, astonished at how light she felt in spite of being completely saturated. He carried her in the direction of he saw her face in the porch light as her head rolled against his shoulder at the door. She was lovely, the kind of beauty that frightened him more than anything else and had once given him hope for eternity never could. Water dripped from both of them over the wooden floor as he kicked open his door and entered. He had kept it up in isolation. He placed her on his couch, which he had used for many evenings. He persuaded himself that he was better off by himself. She gave a little stir. For a brief moment, her green eyes flickered open, eyes wide with what may have been relief and perplexity. Her lips moved silently as she attempted to speak before once more she lost consciousness. However, Malachi noticed something in that fleeting instant that made his chest tighten with a sensation he had been attempting to ignore for 10 years. I hope, and he understood whatever had caused this, she wasn't going to have her life changed by a woman in a damaged wedding dress showing up at his door. It was going to break his heart is surrounded by well-built walls that make him recall what it was like to care for someone more than himself. He had to decide if he was strong enough to make it through this time. 3 hours later, when she awoke, a pair of steel-gray eyes eyeing her from the other side of the room was the first thing Evangeline saw. The second item, the first thing she noticed, was that her bridal gown was gone. She felt panic strike. Like lightning, she ran away, Standing up on the strange couch, holding a rough wool blanket to her breast, feeling her heart pounding, ribs, the room whirled a little. Timber walls, a fireplace made of stone that crackles with the smell of something that might have been soup, coffee and warmth, simple. The man spoke calmly, steady, without moving to meet her. He sat in a window-facing chair with his hands clasped loosely in front of him. "You're secure." Secure? The word was unfamiliar to her. It had been months, perhaps years, since she had been safe. Her gaze swept across searching the room for weapons, escape routes, and any indication of the guys who had been pursuing her throughout the storm. Where am I? Her throat was scratchy from crying, and her speech was barely audible. Yelling into the wind. "I assume you were trying to get to my ranch, which is in the middle of nowhere." He studied her features with a small twist of his head. "Malachi Thorne is the name. Been live alone out here for the past 10 or so years." "By yourself?" That accounted for the cautious distance he was maintaining. Although it seemed nearly awkward to have someone else in his personal space, it also meant that no one was aware of her presence. "Nobody could locate her. Your dress was completely drenched. I assumed you didn't want to die from freezing while unconscious." He made a motion, her wedding gown draped from a homemade line beside the fireplace. "The fabric is still releasing. Steam. There are dry clothes on the table." It was once someone else's. The silence revealed all the information she required about that other person. Thank you. She meant it. She had been saved by this stranger. Provided her with clothing and shelter without question, but she had learned from experience that good things always came at a cost. "What are you looking for?" His face flashed with something. Startled, perhaps offended. "Nothing. Storm, it's still roaring outside. You can go to your destination once it passes." Evangeline suddenly became aware that she had nowhere to go. The men would continue to hunt her even if the storm passed. Her brother's debts from gambling didn't vanish simply because she had fled the altar. Clayton Voss was not forgiving, and he never forgot when he was humiliated in front of half the region. "I am unable to go." Before she could stop, the words came out. They'll track me down. I'll be pulled back by them." This time, she felt the marks on her wrist without realizing it. When she attempted to decline the marriage, Clayton gave it to her. Malachi's face grew serious. "Who is trying to find?" She wrapped the blanket tighter about herself. "You? People you don't want to cross. Trust me. I ought to leave. Trouble is already at my door, so I don't want to bring it to yours. The question is, will I let it too? Either freeze to death on my porch or take action." He got to his feet and walked to the window to look out at the storm. His profile was lit by lightning. A face that had seen too much and learned, with a strong jaw and aged skin, to have low expectations of the world. Furthermore, he stated without looking back, "It's been years since I had a valid reason to pull out my firearm. It could be helpful to recall what it's like to battle for something valuable to preserve." Evangeline's chest tightened with something she hadn't felt in a long time because of the way he stated it. She was nearly at a loss for a name. However, as her heart started to blossom with hope, the sound of horses' hooves, hardly audible above the storm, thundered in the distance, but they had located her as they drew nearer. Malachi heard them as well. At the window, he became rigid. Each muscle tensed up like a spring poised to break. Following a decade of stillness, he was able to distinguish between difficulty and thunder. Additionally, that steady thumping cutting the ladder was unquestionably through the storm. "How many?" There was an edge to his voice that had not been there before. "Just before." Evangeline closed her eyes and used her trained ear to listen to the hoofbeats that were approaching. Someone who has spent her entire life on the run, maybe 4 or 5 riders. When hunting, Clayton doesn't go light. Clayton, like a curse. The name was uttered. Voss, Clayton. Her blood became icy. "You are aware him?" Malachi's stomach dropped when she saw the expression on his face as he turned from the window. Every police officer from this area to San Francisco is acquainted with Clayton Voss. What does a man who owns half the property do? What do Nevada's silver mines want with a bridesmaid? Today was the day I was to wed him. What the words tasted. Like ash in her mouth. "He's owed money by my brother." A substantial sum of money. The payment was me. The ensuing quiet was only disturbed by the roar of approaching horses and the crackling fire. Malachi remained still, analyzing the information she had given him, and Evangeline could almost see him considering his choices. Assist a stranger and turn against one of the most dangerous men in the area, or give her up and go back to his tranquil seclusion. She wouldn't hold it against him for going for peace. She had long since learnt not to look to men for bravery when it could be expensive for them. Finally, he mentioned that there was a root cellar behind the kitchen. Concealed door beneath. A rug? You can wait until the answer is no. Clinging to the blanket like armor, Evangeline got to her feet. I'm not going to hide while you confront them by yourselves. They will kill you for providing me with refuge if they discover me here. Your blood won't be on my— I refuse to have your hands on mine, he said, advancing to a cabinet by the fireplace and removing a gun that, despite years of neglect, it appeared well kept. Go to the cellar. The hoofbeats were near, but that's not a request. Enough that they could now hear voices giving orders and individual horses. Evangeline recognized among them, Clayton's voice was composed, in control, and lethal. He had discovered— He won't give up, she said, following her route to this sanctuary she had believed was inaccessible, muttered. He'll return even if you persuade him that I'm not here. He will continue to search till what? Malachi was using muscle memory from his years as a sheriff. He checks his gun with lack of practice until he finds yes. The straightforward truth of it appeared to hit him. Like a ton of bricks? You drag yourself back to marry him whether you want to or not. Bodily strike. He paused his activity and gave her a serious look. This woman had fallen into his well-orderly environment, had completely appended it in a few hours. All right, then, he said, approaching the door with a gloomy— The knock was courteous, almost kind, and I suppose we'd better make sure that doesn't happen. Kind of knock that indicated, we're willing to be civil about this for the time being, and we know you're in there. Malachi Clayton's voice came clearly through the wooden door, Thorne. I apologize for the late hour, but I'm trying to find someone, a young woman in a wedding dress, who may have passed this way, is ill. Malachi's grip on his rifle tightened. He needs medical help. Behind him, with all of her instincts telling her to go, Evangeline shoved herself against the wall. But there was nowhere to go. As certain as if she were in a cage, the storm had imprisoned her here. I'm going to open this door, Malachi whispered softly, not keeping his gaze off the door. No matter what, don't come out of hiding when I do. Make me a promise, Malachi. Can't allow you? Make me a promise. His voice was desperate, and he spoke her name as if it were important, as if he went to the door, and Evangeline saw that in the process. Something cracked inside her chest, I swear. In a matter of hours, this stranger had emerged as the last obstacle between her from a destiny worse than death, and Malachi opened the door just enough for him to step in, and she watched him risk everything for a lady he hardly knew. Outside, the storm had subsided to a steady rain, but the wind was still howling, and the rifle was held casually but preparedly. Clayton Voss sat on his horse as if he ruled the earth, and he rode over the mountains like something alive and furious. He did it in a variety of ways. Tall, well-dressed, and smiling without ever looking. Behind him, with the patience of expert murderers, 4 men waited in their saddles, Honest resting close to their weapons. Mr. Thorne, in a mocking gesture. Clayton tapped the brim of his hat. It was a lovely evening for a ride, wouldn't it? A little damp for me. Malachi spoke in a normal, level tone. What can I do for you, Voss? As I said, I'm searching for my Evangeline. The bride fled our wedding today, which is understandable. She has been out in this storm for hours, and I'm worried. Nerves, freezing feet, the typical feminine hysteria. Malachi's skin crawled when he mentioned bride, as if she were a piece of property that had strayed and required to be picked up. I haven't seen any women in this area, or anyone in general. Clayton's widened, of course not. However, you understand that it's for her safety, and won't bother you if my men look around. Wasn't a request? A man with lifeless eyes and scars was already dismounting from one of the riders, and Malachi recognized the type. The sort of guy who liked to harm creatures that were weaker than himself. I do mind, in fact. Malachi shifted a little, making the firearm more visible. This is private property. Do you wish to search it? I had best get a warrant. A warrant? Clayton chuckled, the sound piercing the rain like shattered glass. I own the bank that has the mortgage on half of it, so I believe you're not sure how things operate here, dear man. Men like you? I own the water rights to the majority of the streams in this valley. Assume, then, that you are here for my pleasure. The scarred man had now arrived at the porch, water trickling from his coat onto Malachi's hardwood stairs. Check the house, the boss commanded, so I did. No, Malachi muttered. You're not. As 5 terrible men understood that the hermit was. There, the world appeared to stop, and even the storm held its breath. Clayton's amiable face remained unchanged, but something told them they weren't going to back down. Changed behind his eyes, displaying a calculating and frigid demeanor that demonstrated why he had become one of the most dreaded men in the area. I don't think you realize how serious this is, Mr. Thorne. My bride is mentally. She attacked me earlier today. If you look, you can see the scratches on my face. She was unstable, even dangerous. Closely, she poses a risk to your safety if she is present. Malachi could see the scratches, and he could also see what defensive wounds from someone struggling. For their life, and they truly were. She's not here, he repeated. Then you will not mind demonstrating it. The scarred man advanced one more step, and Malachi made a choice that might alter everything. He lifted the weapon, making his intentions very apparent without really pointing it at anyone. I said, No, how would you respond if you were Malachi? Let's hope they don't search. Should you go look for Evangeline or take a chance on a gunfight? With 5 armed men? Tell me in the comments. Tell me which side you would pick, please. Because Malachi's next decision would decide if either of them survived to witness the grieving. The quiet lasted like a taut snap with one hermit and 5 armed men, with a weapon and a woman whose life was in danger somewhere behind the walls. Clayton looked at Malachi with the rain kept coming down. The kind of attention a snake pays a mouse before determining whether it's worth the effort to strike. To fall, but the ferocity of the storm had passed, leaving an almost unnatural silence. You know, Clayton said, I've heard stories about you, Malachi Thorne, he remarked, leaning back in his saddle. Formerly a sheriff, didn't you down in Copper Creek? Prior to you choosing to live alone in these mountains, Malachi's hold became more firm. On his weapon. I heard you were quiet about his history, especially when it came to men like Clayton Voss, fair, honest, and a man who believed in justice, the lawman. Clayton's sharpened smile. I also heard the reason you departed, which was about a woman who liked other men's company. Maliki felt 10 years of well-stored anguish rise to the surface as the words struck her like a physical blow. Threatening to, he could feel it behind him through the thin cabin walls, eating away at the iron grip he had constructed around his emotions. Ancient history, he remarked. Is it because, from where I sit, Evangeline listening and that awareness kept him anchored? You appear to be repeating your previous error by jeopardizing all for a woman who will eventually reveal you her genuine nature. Clayton leaned forward in his saddle. I'll admit that Evangeline is stunning, but she's also she was a thief, a liar, and utterly unstable. The scratches on my face were her response to a polite discussion about our future together. During his tenure as sheriff, Malachi had witnessed enough victims to acknowledge the reality. The person who scratched Clayton's face wasn't unstable. Rather, they were, as I mentioned, she isn't here. Clayton sighed. The sound of a patient man nearing the end of his life, James, the scarred man, stepped forward with eagerness, his fingers reaching to his revolver, but before he could draw, Malachi made a startling noise, a harsh, rusty laugh. The 5 men were motionless, suddenly unsure, but it sliced through the tension like a sword. You know what's amusing? Leveling his rifle at Clayton's chest, Maliki remarked, My wife deserted me 10 years ago. My life seemed to be over. I believed that I would never trust anyone again. Don't worry about anything but surviving one day after day. The rifle remained steady, and his voice became more hushed and menacing. "But you know what I discovered? Sometimes the things we believe will ruin us actually teach us our true nature up here in the mountains. And while I see you and you're paid." Assassins attack an innocent woman right now. I'm recalling precisely. Why did I become a police officer in the first place? Clayton's calmness wavered a little. "Mr. Thorne, you're making an extremely significant error. Perhaps, but I made the mistake." Malachi's finger moved. The standoff could have lasted hours or seconds. "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me." The conclusion, the sound of a horse approaching from the town's direction, interrupted it. A lone rider was traveling quickly in spite of the muddy circumstances. Everyone's attention was drawn when a young man riding a horse appeared, donning a deputy's badge and appearing as though he would prefer to be anywhere else in the world. The deputy, Mr. Voss, yelled, controlling his horse at the sheriff, asked, "Me to find you on the edge of the clearing. The situation with the Blackwood mine has changed," he adds. "I need you back in town." Clayton's jaw tensed in exasperation instantly, but Malachi could see him weighing the chances and potential outcomes. It seemed that whatever was going on with the mine was more significant than carrying on with this conflict. "Evangeline belongs to me, and I always collect," Clayton said, gathering his reins. "But it's not over, Thorne. What's mine? And if you come back here, you'd better bring more," Malachi said, adding that she wasn't anyone's property. Clayton signaled his men to follow him as he spun his horse around, and as they galloped off into the night, "The deputy, you might want to consider leaving the territory, Mr. Thorne," he murmured softly after lingering for a while. Clayton Voss. Doesn't forget or forgive? Give the channel a subscribe if you're enjoying the story. As the final hoofbeats receded into the distance, Malik stayed on his porch, keeping his weapon ready, and kept an eye out for any indication of movement. He knew the deputy, but he didn't let himself breathe again until he was positive they were really gone. Was correct. Clayton would return and would be ready for battle the next time. After the riders had left, Malachi stayed in the doorway for a few minutes, allowing the rain to cascade over him while he absorbed what had just transpired. He had avoided this type of confrontation for 10 years. Complexity. He had just turned against one of the region's most powerful men, and all for a woman he'd knew for less than a day. Evangeline was still wrapped and sitting on the couch when he eventually returned inside. She was no longer hidden in the blanket, but her emerald eyes revealed something he hadn't anticipated. "See? Guilt, not relief or thanks. You ought to have let him to take me like hell. Malachi, you don't realize what you've done." Clayton doesn't simply forget. "He'll come," she murmured softly. He put the gun down and walked to the hearth, saying, "I know exactly what I've done. I'll be back with more men. I know exactly who Clayton Voss is, and I need another log to keep the fire burning." In the firelight, Evangeline examined his face and noticed something that made her stomach knot. "History, I've cleaned up enough of his mess to know what kind of man he is, but not directly between you two." Malachi's voice held the burden of past experiences and past shortcomings. 3 years prior, when I was still wearing a badge, a young woman told me that Clayton was pressuring her to wed him in order to pay off her father's debts, and I advised her to have faith in the legal system. I would find a way to assist her. Evangeline learned all she needed to know about how that story worked from the silence that ensued, concluded what happened to her. A week later, her body was discovered in the river. It was officially declared a suicide, although everyone had the proof that Clayton was involved. But for some reason, he understood the truth and his hands were locked into fists. The witness statements vanished from the sheriff's office, and the sheriff purchased a new, luxurious home for himself. Evangeline felt something icy settle in her chest as he abruptly decided he didn't want to pursue the case any further. Although she had seen hints of Clayton's brutality and knew he was dangerous, hearing it confirmed made her realize how close she had come to being permanently lost. "You were the law, so why didn't you fight it?" Malachi turned to face her, and she saw something heartbreaking in his eyes, the expression of a man who had lost faith in what he had previously held. "Because I discovered that justice isn't about doing what's right, but rather about who has. Clayton had the most firearms and the most money, so you fled, but I made it out alive." The news was more brutal than Evangeline tightened the blanket about herself as he had planned. Same thing you're trying to do. Realizing why this remote ranch had the feel of a jail. Malachi hadn't simply been hiding from the outside world. The woman who died, she added cautiously, had been hiding from his own failure to protect someone who had trusted him. What was her name, Sarah? Haha, Mitchell, he said softly. She was 19 years old, had her entire life before her. And that shame has been with you for 3 years. There are some things you can't write down. Evangeline got up and walked toward the fire and toward him. Clayton informed me that I was fortunate to be marrying him. Most in my case, women did not receive such a generous offer. The majority of women in your situation die. The truth of it was a shock to her. Even though she had knew she was in danger, hearing it aloud made it more real. It was real in a way that had never happened before. What then do we do? He will return? Additionally, he will bring enough troops to burn when he arrives. This spot to the ground if necessary. Malachi remained silent for a while, gazing into the fire as though we have maybe 12 hours before he sorts out whatever it is that he's been asking himself for years. Finally, after that, we run, he claimed, adding, crisis pushed him away. His tone was hard and decisive when he answered, No, I'm done running. The way he said it made something that may have been fear or hope made Evangeline's heart accelerate, but before she could question, what he meant was that they both froze when they heard footsteps on the porch, and Malachi snatched up his rifle and Evangeline was signaled to go under the couch in a single, seamless motion, but rather than the loud knock they had heard, this voice was different earlier. It was tentative and even contrite. Mr. Thorne, it's Deputy Morrison, a young voice said through the door. I'm by myself. Malachi went to the door, with caution, firearm in hand. He could see the same young deputy who had broken up the standoff through the window. Earlier, amid the rain, standing alone. What do you want, Morrison? To help, sir, if you'll let me, Malachi replied. Regarded Evangeline with a glance. This might be a trap, or it might be their first lucky break ever. Night, Malachi remarked through the door. You're Clayton's guy now? I'm the law's man, sir. At least I'm making an effort. To be. Malachi recognized himself from 20 years ago in the deputy's voice, which was a mix of dread and resolve. When he thought he could change things and put on a badge for the first time. He opened the door against his better judgment, the doorway. Deputy Morrison was about 25 years younger than Malachi had assumed, with a sort of sincere expression that was nonetheless unable to conceal disappointment. He entered with a hat on and water dripping from his coat. Malachi said cautiously, Deputy, keep your peace. Morrison looked across at Evangeline, who was standing behind the couch, observing him suspiciously. Ma'am, I would like you to be aware that what took place at the church today. It wasn't universally accepted as correct. What took place at the church? Malachi inquired. Morrison appeared uneasy. Tommy, the brother of Miss Evangeline, attempted to halt the wedding, claimed that his sister was being coerced against her will into it. On suspicion of disturbing him, Clayton had him knocked senseless and taken to jail. The tranquility. Evangeline put her hand to her mouth in a gasp. Is he Tommy? Still alive? Indeed, ma'am. But he's very hurt. Clayton has him imprisoned until following your actions until the matter has been settled. Clayton's insurance policy was that, even if Evangeline escaped, he might still use his power to get her back. You're telling us this, but why? Malachi made a demand. Morrison stood up straight, his shoulders examining every square inch of the lawman he aspired to be. Since I became a deputy to keep people safe, not to assist wealthy men in retrieving their assets, and because I am aware of Sarah Mitchell's fate. The room echoed with the name, similar to a thunderclap. Malachi's face became stern. What are your knowledge of Sarah? She didn't murder herself, I know that. I am aware that when she refused to wed Clayton, he had her killed. The voice of Morrison trembled a little. I am also aware that Sheriff Bradley threw out the evidence in order to keep himself safe. You cannot demonstrate any of that. I was present when they removed her body from the river, albeit perhaps not in court. The marks on her throat were visible to me. Her wrists were bruised, Mr. Thorne? That wasn't suicide. It was murder. Malaki sensed a change within his chest. A creaky door that he had locked for 3 years. Why didn't you say anything back then? I felt green, afraid, and believed the sheriff was an experienced professional. Morrison balled his hands into fists. I've wished I hadn't been silent every day after that. With the blanket still draped over her shoulders, Evangeline rose too. Her feet, you expressed a desire to assist. How? Morrison extracted a badge from within his coat. Even in the darkness, a federal marshal star shone bright, by the light of a fire. Marshal Williams is en route from the capital of the territory. It should arrive by morning. Months were spent looking into Clayton's activities, waiting for the ideal opportunity to act. Morrison gazed straight at Evangeline. Given what transpired with Sarah and your evidence regarding the forced marriage, it might be sufficient to bring him down at last. Perhaps, Malaki sounded doubtful, we have a greater chance than we have ever had. Evangeline saw optimism in the features of both men, but she could only feel the weight of choices that were out of her reach. Calmly, you don't understand, she remarked. Clayton has my brother in addition to threatening me, so if I testify, Morrison frankly stated, against him, Tommy's dead either way. Clayton cannot afford to leave witnesses, but if we can save you both if we can obtain Marshal Williams enough proof to arrest him. If not, the deputy's silence was sufficient response. Malachi walked up to the window and gazed out at the shadows where Clayton and his men had vanished. A young man was languishing in a detention cell somewhere, battered and shattered after attempting to save his sister. Meanwhile, a murderer was plotting his next move elsewhere, certain that cash and bloodshed would get him anything he desired, similar to how Sarah Mitchell trusted the law to keep her safe 3 years prior. The distinction was that Malachi would not allow the machine to malfunction this time. Morrison, he turned back to the deputy and asked, how long until dawn? Maybe 4 hours. The young man's face became white. Evangeline thought, how long until Clayton realizes you're missing? Her heart sank. Clayton would never allow them go, even if the marshal showed up and they had sufficient proof. Survive long enough to testify? However, she noticed something in Malachi's face in the firelight that made her heartbeat quickened. He was finished escaping and allowing Clayton Voss to ruin innocent lives. The query was whether they would be able to withstand what was about to happen. Dawn broke over the mountains, turning the sky the hue of rusty steel. Malachi watched the sun battle through the clouds as they approached from his window. Clayton hadn't only brought 4 men. 12 riders, dispersed in a broad line, came through the morning fog. Formation that mentioned military accuracy? They're here, he continued, and they meant to finish this one way or another. Evangeline, who had changed into the extra clothing, approached him at the window in silence, her face white but determined. He had given her a shirt that had once belonged to his wife and some basic pants, which somehow made her appear stronger. More like a lady prepared to defend herself than a victim. Where is Morrison? She inquired, going around to, and if it goes well, Malachi said, checking his shoulder. If this goes bad, he'll try to get word to the marshal. The riders paused at the final rifle. Then we trust that justice still means something in this territory. Edge of his land, and Clayton got off with the easy assurance of someone who had never lost a battle. Couldn't buy his way out of. He wasn't grinning this time, though. Thorne, he yelled, we need to talk. Malaki entered his porch with Evangeline at his side, and he could sense her shaking. However, she remained firm. I'm listening, Malachi said. Simple trade. The woman you give her to her brother. Tommy is set free, and you are allowed to continue living your quiet little existence up here. We burn it after Clayton spreads his arms wide and points to the armed men encircling the cabin if I don't. Hold down and search through the ashes for what remains of you. Evangeline then took an unexpected action. She moved forward to join everyone, including herself. I'll accompany you, she said. Evangeline, no. Malachi began, her voice resonating clearly across the open. However, I have conditions, she continued, disregarding him. You leave Malachi alone and Tommy escapes safely, forever? You're scarcely in a position to negotiate, my dear, aren't I? Clayton smiled back. You've already shown that you'll kill anyone who stands in your way, as Sarah Mitchell shown. Evangeline's voice became louder. However, I'll make sure that everyone knows precisely what type of man you are if you hurt any of them, even if it's my final action. Clayton's expression darkened when Sarah's name was mentioned. Be careful, Evangeline. We're all trekking on hazardous terrain. She advanced one more step. The distinction is that I'm done being scared of you. At that moment, they heard the sound of horses thundering in from the other direction. But federal insignia that shone in the early morning light were something that these motorcyclists wore that the others did not. Marshal Williams brought 6 armed men with the grim looks of law enforcement officers who had witnessed too much corruption go unpunished. For the first time, Clayton's self-assurance wavered when he realized his meticulous preparations were going to dismount with inadequate experience. Clayton Voss, the marshal, yelled, "You're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Mitchell, people trafficking, and murder plot." "You don't have any evidence," Clayton growled. "But we have Deputy Morrison's testimony." Miss Evangeline's declaration regarding the fact that his hand was already reaching for his revolver. Forced marriage, as well as a federal probe that has been assembling evidence against you for several months. The ensuing gunfight was short but vicious, and Clayton drew first. Marshall's voice was tranquil, final, "It's over." Clayton Voss was dead in the dirt when the smoke cleared, but Morrison's shot from the ridge was quicker. His empire of the weight of months of terror finally caused Evangeline to collapse on Malachi, signaling the end of the violence and fear, lowering off her shoulders. That same day, Tommy was released, battered but still alive. Sheriff Bradley was arrested as a result of the marshal's investigation, which also revealed a corrupt network that had kept Clayton safe for many years. Malachi and Evangeline learned even the most damaged individuals might occasionally be the ones who help one another recover. The rancher who had lived alone for 10 years discovered that it was worthwhile to live again after spending time with someone who understood survival and grief. In the same church where Evangeline had once escaped from another altar, they were married months later. She voluntarily went down the aisle to a man who had demonstrated that love wasn't about material possessions, but rather about defense, about deciding to stand up for someone even when it would be simpler to leave. The wedding gown was unique. The groom was unique, and most significantly, she made the decision. If you're enjoying the article, please subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the most romantic tales start with a person passing out in the rain at your door. Knowing that the life you're defending is more valuable than safety gives you the strength to start over. You're holding on tight. The bride had at last found someone worthy of her hand in marriage, and the rancher was no longer alone. To hear a story even better than this one with a twist so potent you won't soon forget, click the video on the screen soon.